In our headlines on this Monday, April 21st, here in South Korea. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok and Trade Minister An Dok-keun will meet with their U.S. counterparts in Washington, D.C. later this week for tariff talks in a spirit of cooperation rather than confrontation. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party's presidential contender will be announced this coming weekend, while the results of the People Power Party's first elimination will be shared late Tuesday. And former President Yoon was in court earlier on this Monday for the second hearing of the criminal case against him on charges of insurrection. Top finance and trade officials are sitting down with their U.S. counterparts in Washington, D.C. later this week for tariff talks. And acting President Han Duck-soo says the strategy is dialogue, not dispute. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young explains.
South Korea will not fight the United States over Donald Trump's tariffs. But it will also seek national interest first as top trade officials meet in Washington this Thursday. That's according to acting President Han Duck-soo, who on Monday confirmed South Korea's finance and trade ministers will meet their US counterparts for a 2+2 consultation. On Thursday, 8 a.m. local time or 9 p.m. in South Korea, Choi Sang-mok and An Dok-keun will sit down with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and US Trade Representative Jamieson Greer on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank spring meetings. This will be followed by separate one-on-one meetings between the ministers. The bilateral was first proposed by the US after the Trump administration decided to delay its reciprocal tariffs, including a 25% duty on South Korean goods. The wide-ranging tariffs were paused for 90 days after panic in US markets wiped out $5.4 trillion in just 48 hours. Shortly before implementing the pause on April 9th, the US president held a half-hour phone call with acting President Han Duck-soo and ordered officials to prioritize deals with allied countries like South Korea and Japan, projecting optimism that a great deal could be made. Han told government officials Monday that the talks won't be easy, but he expects it will mark the beginning of cooperation.
With the principle of putting our national interests first, the government will approach the consultations with the United States calmly and earnestly, doing our utmost to find a mutually beneficial win-win solution. We will specifically confirm each side's interests regarding the three key areas mentioned during my phone call with President Trump: trade balance, shipbuilding, and LNG, and seek mutually reciprocal points of agreement.
In interviews with foreign media, Han has said Seoul will not fight the US, but hinted there could be concessions for a win-win deal between the long-term allies. He suggested South Korea could increase purchases of US liquefied natural gas and commercial aircraft. Korean shipyards could also help America maintain its naval shipbuilding capacity. Seoul could further discuss non-tariff barriers, addressing existing US concerns about auto emissions regulations, pharmaceutical pricing, beef imports, and network fees imposed on platforms like Netflix. It's unclear whether the cost of keeping US soldiers in South Korea will be raised during the session. While Trump has indicated he'd like a one-stop shopping deal, combining trade and defense issues into a single package, Seoul officials are prioritizing trade talks to tackle tariffs, keeping security matters separate. The government has described the meeting as a consultation, not a negotiation, signaling a measured approach. On whether the US leader might appear at the meeting in person, as he did unexpectedly during talks with Japan last week, South Korea's trade minister said Sunday that Seoul is preparing for such a scenario. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And while we await that upcoming bilateral consultation, the toll of U.S. tariffs on Korea's trade numbers has become clear. Exports lost ground during the first 20 days of this month. According to the Korea Customs Service, outbound shipments stood at $33.9 billion during this period, down 5.2% on year. In fact, findings show Korea's exports to the U.S. market tumbled over 14% in the face of Trump's tariffs. Among Korea's top 10 export items, 9, including cars, noted declines, while chips climbed. On the political front, the Democratic Party's presidential contender for the early election will be announced this coming weekend, while the results of the People Power Party's first elimination will be shared late Tuesday. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers the partisan campaigns.
As the Democratic Party of Korea's frontrunner Lee Jae-myung strengthens his dominance in the party's presidential primary, with around 90% of the cumulative votes so far, he now looks beyond the primaries and eyes the undecided voters for the actual presidential race. On Monday, he visited the Korea Financial Investment Association and discussed the stock exchange. He pledged to surpass 5,000 points in the stock market through various measures, around double of what it's at today. Meanwhile, the current runner-up, Kim Dong-yeon, has pledged to turn the primary around, saying having a clear frontrunner is not good for the party overall. The party will announce the results of its primaries in the Jeollado provinces on Saturday and those for the Seoul metropolitan area alongside Gangwon-do province and Jeju on Sunday. Public polls accounting for 50% of the total will be held for 2 days between April 21st and 27th, with the final candidate confirmed on April 27th. Meanwhile, after 2 days of heated debates, the open poll for the first round cutoff for the People Power Party primary started on Monday, with 4 of 8 to be cut. This is a 100% open opinion survey where both PPP and undecided supporters will be surveyed. And to boost their chances, 3 contestants traveled to Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do province on Monday, a region known as a conservative stronghold. Han Dong-un went to Gyeongju City to visit the preparations for this year's APEC summit. Na Kyung-won and An Cheol-soo also visited Daegu to meet with supporters there. Kim Mun-soo, who has a slight lead among the 8 contestants according to recent polls, pledged to expand rapid train lines across the nation, while Hong Jun-pyo shared his vision for welfare through a press conference. The result of the polling done on Monday and Tuesday will be released sometime on Tuesday evening. Kim Do-yeol, Arirang News.
In other news, former President Yoon Suk-yeol was in court earlier on this Monday for the second hearing of the criminal case against him on charges of insurrection. Our Moon Hae-ryun reports.
A dark navy suit paired with a red tie. This is what former President Yoon Suk-yeol wore to the second hearing of his criminal trial on Monday. In the first footage made available to the public since his trial began, he was seen entering the courtroom and taking his seat at the defendant's bench with his lips tightly closed, ignoring the press cameras flashing around him. The media were required to leave before proceedings officially began. Previously, the court did not allow the media to film in the courtroom, explaining that the request came in too late for the appropriate judicial procedures to be followed. At today's trial, Yoon's legal team cross-examined Cho Sung-yeon from the Army's Capital Defense Command, who had been summoned as a key witness by the prosecution. During the first hearing last week, Cho testified that he received a direct order from his superior to enter the National Assembly and remove lawmakers on the night of the martial law order declaration last December. Yoon's legal team questioned the feasibility of such an order before challenging the credibility of his testimony by highlighting inconsistencies between his statements across different legal proceedings. Throughout the session, the defense continued to warn Cho that false testimony could result in legal consequences and demanded that he speak accurately. The exchange escalated when Cho, frustrated by repeated questioning, appealed directly to the bench, which was acknowledged by the judge. To secure a conviction on charges of insurrection, prosecutors must prove that Yoon deliberately sought to overthrow the constitutional order by mobilizing the military. If found guilty, he could face life imprisonment or even the death penalty. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
On the international front, a 30-hour ceasefire unilaterally declared by Russia to mark Easter Sunday this past weekend has come to an end amid much doubt about the sincerity of the declaration. Our Park Gun-woo has more.
Ukraine and Russia have accused each other of violating the Easter truce that lasted 30 hours from 6 p.m. Saturday Moscow time and has now expired. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has alleged that Russian forces breached the ceasefire around 3,000 times since Sunday. He earlier said Russia had no intention of ending the war, adding he was only interested in a PR exercise. Similar skepticism was shared by those on the front lines.
It was announced only to show to the world as if they're making some steps, concessions for us, but in reality, nothing has changed.
On the other side, the Russian Foreign Ministry accused Kyiv of violating the truce over 1,000 times, firing shells and launching hundreds of drones and even some US-supplied missiles. Its defense ministry said Moscow strictly observed the ceasefire. Some residents in Donetsk, that's been under Russian control since 2014, expressed distrust toward Ukraine.
I don't have hopes on the Ukrainian side. They have deceived us so many times, I do not trust them.
While Ukraine urged for an extension of the truce, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said just hours before its expiration that no new orders have been received from President Vladimir Putin. Amid the continuing tensions, U.S. President Donald Trump expressed hope on Sunday that the two sides will be able to make a peace deal this week, adding it could open the doors for big business with the U.S. With the U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal possibly being signed later this week, attention now turns to whether new efforts will be made to help bring the war to an end. Park Gonu, Arirang News.
Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba sent a ritual offering to Tokyo's Yasukuni Shrine on this Monday as the shrine began its three-day annual Spring Festival. Now, a similar offering was made during the Autumn Festival last year. The Japanese leader is reportedly not expected to make an in-person visit in light of concerns of a potential backlash from South Korea and China. The shrine honors 14 convicted Class A Japanese war criminals from the Second World War. The last sitting Japanese Prime Minister to visit the shrine in person was Shinzo Abe back in the year 2013. South Korea is scheduled to send into space its fourth spy satellite Tuesday morning Korea time from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Now, this latest launch is part of South Korea's plan to put into orbit 5 satellites by the end of this year to bolster surveillance of North Korea's nuclear and missile threats and reduce reliance on U.S. satellite imagery. South Korea's first spy satellite was launched in December 2023. The success of this latest launch will be confirmed some 3 hours after blastoff. On the defense front, South Korea and the U.S. are currently involved in a 2-week air drill that began last week and will last until early May. Our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung files this report.
Fighter jets fly through the air, making thunderous sounds. This as part of South Korea and the U.S.'s large-scale joint air power exercise, the Freedom Flag at Gwangju Air Base. Held 2 times in a year, combining Korea flying training and vigilant defense, this over 2-week journey began on Thursday. Aiming to advance combined air power capabilities while improving interoperability between pilots from both countries, the 24-hour operating mission planning cell organizes the exercise for pilots to embark on their missions. Approximately 1,100 personnel joined the drill and more than 90 aircraft, including unmanned aerial vehicles such as U.S. MQ-9, take part in the event.
This drill will serve as a chance to further strengthen the combined defense posture and enhance our joint response capabilities against various threats on future battlefields.
Another notable part is that the drill will also be based on complex scenarios against a high-level simulated threat involving an advanced stealth jet. This is a U.S. Marine Corps F-35B, one of the U.S. stealth fighter jets that came from Japan. Along with RK F-35As, these 5th-generation jets will play the role of Red Air enemy aircraft for the first time during the exercise.
By putting a stealth fighter, our most capable, on the red side, it gives our pilots, our airbound managers, everyone involved, a more difficult problem to try and solve. So by going against a capable threat, we're just enhancing our own capability through these missions.
By carrying out high-level air-to-air combat missions and working side by side, South Korea and the U.S. expect bolstered trust building upon the alliance. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Gwangju.
South Korean carmakers clinched 7 awards at the 2025 Red Dot Design Awards. According to Hyundai Motor and its affiliate Kia Corporation, Kia's compact electric SUV, the EV3, won the Best of the Best award in the product design category, extending the carmaker's success in this category following wins for the EV6 in 2022 and the EV9 in 2024. Meanwhile, Hyundai's Ioniq 9 and the Palisade SUV were also among those honoured in their respective categories. Exports of Kim, Korea's dried seaweed, rose remarkably during the first quarter of this year, with shipments to the US soaring. Our Yoon reports.
The exports of Korean staple Kim, or dried seaweed, hit a record high in the first quarter of this year, driven by strong demand from US and China. According to the Korea Agri-Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation on Monday, Korea's seaweed export value in the first quarter of this year reached $281 million, or around 402 billion Korean won. That is more than 20% increase from the same period last year. Export volume for the first quarter also rose to 10,161 tons, up more than 7% from last year. Compared to the same period in 2015, this marks a massive 844% increase over the past decade. Monthly export growth rates compared to the same period last year stood at more than 7% for January, over 52% for February, and over 10% in March, according to the Korea Maritime Institute's Fisheries Outlook Center. With the demand from major overseas markets remaining high, the center is expecting to see the exports for this month to also exceed of both last year and historical average for the same month. By country, the United States was the largest importer of Korean seaweed in the first quarter, followed by China, Japan, and Thailand. The type of seaweed each country prefers is a bit different though. Most of Korea's seaweed exports to China were in the form of dried seaweed, with 2,258 tons shipped, a whopping 97% increase from the previous year. Meanwhile, the U.S. remains the top destination for seasoned seaweed, with exports reaching 1,367 tons in the first quarter, accounting for more than 30% of total seasoned seaweed exports. The Oceans and Fisheries Ministry attributed such growing demand in China to the popularity of Korean dramas and films, which have sparked a kimbap trend and a surge in dried seaweed consumption. In the U.S., the popularity of seaweed snacks has pushed up demand. With both export volume and value on the rise, the government is expecting Kim exports to hit its annual goal of $1 billion this year, 2 years before the original target date of 2027. Yoon, Arirang News.
A while back, we highlighted the inclusion of a painful chapter in Jeju's history in UNESCO's documentary heritage. Well, today we expand on that event by sharing with you the journey from loss to healing. My colleague An Sung-jin reports from the southern island.
The search for answers still continues, nearly 80 years after the Jeju April 3rd incident. Mr. Yang's grandfather was one of the missing from the incident. Only around 10 years ago did he find out his grandfather had died in prison.
I still get emotional every time I talk about it. But the older I get, the more I understand the hardships of what my grandpa went through. I work on understanding the pain of those who have passed away.
Mr. Yang works for the Association of Victims' Families from the Jeju 4-3 incident. There are some 4,000 tombstones of the missing victims that the families still mourn. The Jeju 4-3 incident traces back to an uprising on the island in the late 1940s, at a time when South Korea was still working on forming its own government. Following discontent over the election process and economic hardships, the Workers' Party of South Korea launched an armed uprising, which the government violently suppressed. Many were killed by the government forces, and others allegedly involved in the uprising were sent to prison and tortured. Many, like Mr. Yang's grandfather, died in prison.
The reason this stone can't be placed is because this still doesn't have a name to it. Some call it a massacre. Some say it's a revolt, but there has been no name given to it.
Around 30,000 people are thought to have died. More than 30% of them were elderly, children, or women who were not affiliated with any of the combatants. Those who know the past and the stories behind it work on raising awareness so more people can recognize the value and the significance of what happened here. The Jeju April 3rd incident became the background for Nobel Prize Literature winner Han Gang's book, We Do Not Part, discussing humanity and the survivors of the incident.
I read testimonies from massacre survivors, pored over materials, and then, in as restrained a manner as I could, without looking away from the brutal details that felt almost impossible to put into words, I wrote what became We Do Not Part.
To make sure the incident and the victims are not forgotten, the Jeju 4-3 archives have been designated as a UNESCO Memory of the World. The documents in the archives illustrated the underlying human stories of Jeju. Time passes, but what remains important is that people continue to remember. 안성진, Arirang News, Jeju.
Right, and according to News Justin, Pope Francis passed away early Monday morning. He was 88 years old. Now, details regarding his passing will be shared with you in our later broadcasts.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. The U.S. and Iran concluded a second round of nuclear talks in Rome on Saturday and agreed to hold another round this week. On April 19th, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi engaged again in indirect talks mediated by Oman at the Omani embassy in Rome. The talks lasted for about 4 hours, focusing on reviving an agreement to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons while allowing for peaceful nuclear energy use. Both sides reported progress and agreed to begin expert-level discussions in Muscat, Oman, starting Wednesday, with a follow-up meeting scheduled for Saturday. Key negotiation points include how to handle Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium and how to ensure that the U.S. does not withdraw from any agreement. The U.S. suggests transferring the uranium to a third country, possibly Russia, while Iran insists on keeping it within its borders. The United States launched more airstrikes on Yemen's capital Sana'a and the coastal city of Hodeidah over the weekend. This comes less than 2 days after a strike on the Ras Isa oil terminal on the Red Sea coast. On Saturday local time, U.S. forces conducted 13 airstrikes targeting sites controlled by the Houthis Sana'a and Hodeidah, including an airport and a port facility. The airstrikes resulted in at least 3 deaths and 4 injuries. This follows an attack on April 17th on the Ras Isa oil terminal, which reportedly killed at least 80 people and injured more than 150 others. The U.S. military says these strikes aim to degrade the Houthis' offensive capabilities and protect international shipping routes in the Red Sea. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed on Saturday grave concern over the attack on Ras Isa and escalating violence in the region. In Germany, the 37th annual Easter egg throwing competition took place on Sunday in the western town of Horhausen. Participants were given a single brightly colored hard-boiled egg to throw as far as possible without it breaking. The longest recorded egg throw to date is 78 meters, set in 2002. Eggs that remain intact are collected and distributed to the crowd, while broken eggs become bird feed. The tradition of Easter egg throwing continues to be a part of Horhausen's Easter celebrations, dating back to the post-Second World War era. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Early summer heat arrived during the day yesterday. The temperature rose even higher today than yesterday. The daytime temperature went up to 26 degrees Celsius in Seoul today. These high temperatures will ease off a bit tomorrow, with rain falling from late tonight. The rain will begin in Jeju Island and spread to the whole country by tomorrow morning, and most of it will stop tomorrow night. As for the amount of rainfall, as much as 120 millimeters will fall on Jeju Island, and up to 80 millimeters of rain is expected on the south coast. The south of the country will also see gusty winds, thunder, and lightning. Other areas, including Seoul, will get 10 to 50 millimeters of rain. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Daejeon will start off at 16 degrees, Gwangju and Jeju at 17 degrees. Highs will move up to around 20 degrees all over the country. After the rain stops tomorrow, clear and warm spring weather will continue for the time being. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching. Our daily panel session is up next.
How to survive in Korea. Weddings. Step 0. Attire. As a guest, dress formal to business casual. Avoid wearing all white, shorts or going topless. Step 1. Arrival time. Arrive 30 minutes prior to the wedding ceremony. Too many cars, too many halls, too many people. There are many twists and turns. Take pictures and shake hands. And write your name vertically, not horizontally, in the guest book. Step 2. Or, shibor. 50,000 won, 100,000 won, 150,000 won. Cash gifts are given in these units. Decide on the amount based on your relationship. Write your name vertically on the envelope. Step 3. Wedding etiquette. Fill up the front row. Guests have 3 duties to fulfill: clapping, cheering, and taking pictures. Step 4. Dining. Take off your jacket. This will be your seat from now on. Start with the not your everyday delicacies. Kalbijjim. Yes. Bosa. Yes. Chili shrimps. Definitely yes. Kimbap. Yeah. Only if you can't live without it. No need to pile up food. You have more than one opportunity. Did you survive the wedding? Wait. Did someone catch your eye? What are you waiting for? You're looking fine today.
about South Korea potentially developing its own nuclear arsenal is being floated yet again as the Trump administration pushes an America First policy on all fronts, leaving its allies anxious about its reliability as a security partner. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, April 21st here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. I'm Min San-hee. To arm or to disarm, to cooperate or to confront. Now, these are some of the questions being raised by U.S. partners. And for more on South Korea's stance, I have Chloe Bognon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio. Chloe, as always, it's good to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
I also have Professor Min Jung-hoon at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy joining this session virtually. Professor Min, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, my pleasure always.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Chloe, let's start with the opinion piece, which was published, I believe, earlier this month in the American newspaper The Hill about letting South Korea go nuclear should it want to. Let's start with the gist of that particular article.
Yes, sure. So there was an opinion paper published that was titled "South Korea might go nuclear and America should let it." So it was, because it's made in an American paper, it was mostly from the point of view of the US. But it's interesting to see the premises of the article. So the author is saying that for decades, the idea, the political statement that the US would risk a war with North Korea to protect the South was something that was for sure there, intangible. But he's saying that there are doubts that have been arising recently because with Trump policy, America's first, but also with this one way of wanting to open the dialogue again with North Korea and recognizing it maybe as a nuclear state. So doubts have been coming in, and is also saying that from the US part, the United States would need a stronger South Korea, and they would need to get better relationship with North Korea so they can deal with what's for Trump the main enemy at the moment, that would be China and the relationship with China. And so according to him, that could lead to South Korea going nuclear and the United States allowing it. So what the author is saying is that there is 2 points that are kind of driving the opinions both in the US and in South Korea toward this idea of going nuclear. The first one is there is the ever-growing strength of North Korea with weapons. So North Korea is going anyway toward the nuclear weapons. So should South Korea, raise to match the North Korean weapons? And the second thing is, so as I was saying at the beginning, the doubts about the US commitment in case of a trouble with North Korea. And he was also speaking about the concerns about non-proliferation for nuclear weapons, because there are some very strict worldwide rules now. And he was kind of, pushing it aside, saying in the end, of all the countries that could want to go nuclear, maybe South Korea is probably the least bad option to consider. So that was also an interesting take on the non-proliferation idea.
Right, it really was an intriguing take. Professor Min, now some pundits believe that Mr. Trump himself may actually trigger a fresh nuclear arms race across the world. Do you share these concerns?
Yes, I share their concerns partially. Specifically, as you know, longtime U.S. allies like Germany, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia, they are considering going nuclear as they face with the threat of U.S. withdrawal from its defense commitments. And increasingly, many countries are now openly talking about having their own nuclear capabilities. And recently, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's interim defense strategic guidance document was reported. And it emphasizes that U.S. will focus on defending American homeland and deterring China's possible invasion of Taiwan. Meanwhile, other security threats like North Korea and Russia will be coped with by its allies like South Korea and NATO. Of course, it's not certain yet if such a strategy will actually take effect, But there is no doubt that U.S. allies and partners will face growing security concerns in their own countries. So it's possible that these allies will decide to go nuclear when they think U.S. will not provide enough deterrence for them. Of course, they know that such a policy decision can bring about domestic political turmoil, international sanctions, and others. But it is also clear that they will seriously consider going nuclear or finding an alternative in the face of the growing security concerns.
Right, and speaking about finding alternatives, Chloe, France actually, it has suggested extending its nuclear umbrella over its European allies. Do tell us more about this particular initiative and its prospects, of course.
Yeah, sure. So it's an idea that was developed by Emmanuel Macron, the President of France. He has done a few hints about it already in 2020. So it was kind of obviously forgotten because of COVID pandemics and everything. So in March, beginning of March, again, he said in a statement at the French television, and he spoke about the idea of having a strategic debate here in France on the use, not here, sorry, in France, on the use of French nuclear deterrence to extend it to European allies. So this is happening while there is the Russian war in Ukraine, as also when we're saying everyone is having doubts about the foreign diplomatic strategy of the US. So that's been raising nuclear tensions in Europe. And if you're speaking solely about the European Union, so Great Britain apart, France is the only country in the European Union who has its own nuclear weapons, and that's our nuclear weapons that are also completely separate from the US. They are made, developed and controlled in France. So that's why France is the only one being able to offer that to the allies. There has been also talked about maybe making it French and Brittany together to help the allies, but here we're mostly speaking about the French initiative. So who's been interested for now? Germany, Poland, Denmark and Lithuania have shown some interest. It's interesting to see, obviously, that there are, for most of them, are the closer countries, closer to Ukraine and Russia. So that's why I was speaking about the fact that the Russian war is probably one of the stronger elements that might make this a reality this time. But there is obviously, there will be counterparts. It's still really an abstract idea for now, but there is a senator of France who say that maybe then those countries should contribute for the, the cost of maintaining the nuclear arsenal. And there was also something that was said by Emmanuel Macron that was, in the end, the decision about nuclear weapons will always and solely be the head of state of France. So President of France is the only one who will have regards and decision regarding those nuclear weapons, whether or not they allow other countries to be under the umbrella. There are still some obstacles. First of all, most of the European countries are part of the NATO program. And the thing is, since the founding of NATO in 1949, the alliance nuclear deterrence was solely based on the US. So there are some of the countries that we've mentioned there that already have nuclear assets from the US on their territory at the moment. And the US might not be willing to leave and let France take over. So that could be one of the obstacles. And then obviously still the non-proliferation treaties might make it harder for some of those countries to, host some new nuclear assets.
Right, so it remains an open debate then. Meanwhile, back here within national borders, Professor Min, I've asked this next question to quite a number of our pundits here in the country, and I'd like to extend it to you as well. Given these circumstances, Professor Min, in the global arena, of course, do you believe time has come for South Korea to develop its own nuclear weapons arsenal?
Yes, personally, I think that we cannot completely exclude the possibility that South Korea will develop its own nuclear weapons. Currently, I think there is a growing concern in South Korea that U.S. will not be able to provide enough extended deterrence against North Korea's nuclear threats. As you know, it is likely that President Trump will meet Chairman Kim Jong-un again, and the two countries can resume their nuclear talks. And based on the situation where President Trump and his cabinet members often referred to North Korea as a nuclear power, and few people in Washington now believe that North Korea will give up its nuclear capabilities, many experts in South Korea think that North Korea and U.S. May have an arms control negotiation that instead of denuclearizing itself, North Korea will reduce its nuclear capabilities in return for lifting economic sanctions and restoring diplomatic relations with the U.S. Then security concerns will rapidly increase in South Korea. And as you know, public opinion on going nuclear, which currently about 70% of South Korean people agree in the polls, will be revitalized in the country. And if South Korea's effort to go nuclear takes shape, there could be a nuclear domino effect, where Japan, Taiwan, Germany, and other allies will also go nuclear.
Right, and speaking about the domino effect, and Chloe, do you suppose Europe itself would embrace the idea of South Korea developing its own nuclear weapons?
I feel like it's a bit of a hard question on how would Europe react. I would say a few years ago, they probably not have been positive with that scenario. I want to say, like, if we take the example of France again, for Iran nuclear escalation, they say that it was dangerous. France has been one of the many countries that are calling for negotiation to start again to make sure that Iran is not developing their own nuclear weapons. Obviously, on North Korea, Europe is saying that North Korean nuclear program is seen as dangerous for the world. They are watchful on that matters. They have been like making sure, really, I would say, centered around non-proliferation treaty. But then the thing is, South Korea is different because the diplomatic situation between Europe and South Korea is different. It's considered as an ally. It's a close ally to the United States. So the thing is, for me, the position of Europe will depend on how strongly they still adhere to the non-proliferation treaty or not. And that could also be put together with how they want for them as well to develop it on the Ukrainian side. So I do feel that at the moment, everything is kind of really connected, and geopolitically speaking, we might see a bit of development. I feel like it's a bit of a hard time to know what position will come out in the near future for everyone.
Right, it remains uncertain right now. Moving forward, Professor Min, Hong Kong's Asia Times had published an opinion piece last week about how South Korea would benefit by taking lessons from India's decision to maintain strategic autonomy. Now, first, speaking as a scholar, Professor Min, what exactly is the concept of strategic autonomy? And second, what do you support for South Korea? Strategic alignment or strategic autonomy?
Well, by definition, strategic autonomy means the ability of a country to pursue its own national interests and adopt its preferred foreign policy without defending heavily on other foreign countries. And as the strategic competition between U.S. and China has intensified over the years, this term has been used to show how other countries like South Korea, EU, India, and ASEAN countries take their positions between the two global powers. And possibly India has been considered as a good example of showing the strategic autonomy between the two countries, because it has successfully adopted its preferred foreign policy based on its national interests. So I think India could have its own strategic autonomy because it does not heavily depend on neither of the countries. However, unlike India, South Korea, as you know, is heavily interrelated with the two countries. The ROK-US alliance is the foundation that South Korea has secured its security on the Korean Peninsula and achieved its rapid economic development in the past. And as U.S.-China strategic competition has intensified, American influence over economy, trade, and technology is significantly increasing nowadays. Meanwhile, China is still an important economic partner of South Korea and a critical player for North Korean issues. So I think it's necessary for South Korea to have a strategic position between the two countries where South Korea reinforces its close relations and enhances its cooperation with the United States while it maintains an amicable relations with China. It means that it's inevitable for South Korea to get closer to the United States, but it also needed to keep a favorable relations with China as an important neighbor and partner. But it would be very difficult.
Right, it is. It's easier said than done, of course, but strategic balance, I suppose, is what you're looking for then, Professor Min, right?
Yes.
Back here in the studio, Chloe, speaking within your capacity as a foreign journalist witnessing the events here as they unfold, do you suppose South Korea is able to frame out a foreign policy that is purely based on national interests, or do you suppose alignment is only inevitable for South Korea?
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to start with saying that I've not been here for a long time. So I've just been here under the mandate of President Yoon Suk-yeol. So I'm really looking at the very recent year, but I know that President Yoon Suk-yeol, when he was elected, he spoke about the fact that South Korea should become a pivotal state. So that's what we're speaking about here, non-alignment and going for their own choices. But in the end, what happened was mostly, as Professor Min was saying, closer, I want to say alignment, but getting closer to the United States and with Japan making the trilateral alliance, which was a way for South Korea to also put their own agenda in the trilateral alliance.
But trilateral partnership with Japan and, of course, the US.
Exactly.
Right.
But the fact is obviously, this has come with the idea that you cannot just put your own agenda and the other countries are also sharing theirs. But I do feel, in my opinion, that South Korea has very strong points to be one of the pivotal states here, with a strong economy, a very strong soft power, obviously with the ALU. There's also the fact that the democracy is kind of very strong one. We've seen it again and again in the recent weeks. And so it has the essential ingredients to play this role. But as Professor Min said, I do also agree with him on the fact that it's hard to be pivotal state in this region because of the competition between the United States and China, and also the fact that South Korea is still, for the moment, an important military base, for example, for the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. So it has good assets, but in the same time, we know that it would be hard to be able to get completely away from all the other powerful countries that are here in the area in the Indo-Pacific region.
Right then, keeping in mind what Chloe said and what you've said earlier, Professor Min, then, what proactive steps should the incoming South Korean administration take to ensure its security and stability going forward?
Well, the incoming South Korean government needed to be pragmatic in its relations with the major counterparts in order to secure its national interests in the rapidly changing diplomatic and security environment. As you know, the strategic environments that South Korea faces nowadays are very tough. And most of all, the Trump government is pursuing its national interests aggressively on the international stage based on the America First foreign policy. Specifically, unlike the previous Biden government, which emphasized universal values, principles, allies, and partners, the Trump government is focused on maximizing its economic and security interests and is willing to negotiate and cooperate with its counterparts, regardless of being allies, non-allies, competitors, and adversaries. And in order to cope with Trump's government's America First policy, many countries are also adopting pragmatic approaches and try to secure its own national interests on the international stage. So South Korea, like other countries, needed to be pragmatic and establish its own strategic approach that it can improve the cooperation with its counterparts and make win-win situations by finding junctures that both countries can be advantageous from the cooperation. Meanwhile, it does not necessarily mean that South Korea needed to abandon the universal values, the principles that it has stood on. Although U.S. may not want to maintain its role as a world police, the rest of the world still need to have global leading countries that are willing to contribute to the stability and peace of the world. So by improving its multilateral cooperation with other major countries like EU, Japan, and other democratic countries, South Korea can maintain its influence on the international community and establish its standing as a responsible, advanced country and the global leading country.
Right. And Chloe, what are your thoughts with regard to a potential strategy by South Korea from its incoming government?
Yeah, I would agree with Professor Min on the fact that there is a win-win situation to be found. I would also say that, as I was saying just before, everything is moving quite quickly at the moment in the world since the beginning of the mandate of Trump. And I do feel that the next South Korean government will have to, go forward way more than everyone else to be able to make sure that diplomatic ties are still strong, make sure that economic ties are still going on. I know that it's currently being done by the government, but I feel like that's the part of to be sure that to get the stability that they need. I do feel that that would be one of the main challenge for the next government, will be to get out there and be able to go to see the US probably first, but then again, as Professor Min was saying, there is the need to be able to become maybe a new actor and a more global actor now that the US are being America first and kind of withdrawing from the words on some parts. So that's, for me, would be the main idea, is to be able to rush out and be able to compensate for the few months where it have been a bit harder for South Korea to be heard.
Right, for sure, Chloe. Quite a number of scholars have been talking about the importance of the new incoming government hitting the ground running. Is probably the idiomatic expression you're looking for. All right, Chloe, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Professor Min, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for Monday's edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow. That is Tuesday.